The COVID-19 pandemic was a time of unprecedented crisis. It was also a time of unprecedented profits, especially for pharmaceutical companies. But what about the public institutions that helped to develop these life-saving vaccines? As it turns out, they too were quietly reaping a financial windfall. At the heart of this story is the National Institutes of Health, NIH, America's premier medical research agency. The NIH is a taxpayer-funded institution, responsible for groundbreaking discoveries in medicine. During the pandemic, the NIH saw an explosion in royalty payments, with millions of dollars flowing into the agency's coffers. This sudden influx of cash raised eyebrows. Where was all this money coming from? And more importantly, who was benefiting from it? The NIH for years had kept its financial dealings tightly under wraps. Information about royalty payments received for inventions made with taxpayer dollars was not readily accessible. This lack of transparency had long raised concerns, but it was not until the pandemic that the true scale of the issue came to light. In 2021, a bombshell report by a government watchdog agency revealed that the NIH had received over $1 billion in royalty payments over the previous decade. It was a staggering sum, and it immediately raised questions about the potential for conflicts of interest. The report further revealed that a significant portion of these payments were related to the development of drugs and vaccines, including some that were developed in direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The report's findings sparked outrage and calls for greater transparency from the NIH. It also led to a series of congressional hearings where lawmakers grilled NIH officials about their financial dealings. The NIH, in response, defended its practices, arguing that royalty payments were necessary to incentivize innovation. However, the agency's explanations did little to quell public concern. The damage was done. This unprecedented surge in revenue was directly linked to the agency's role in developing and testing COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. In 2019, the year before the pandemic hit, the NIH reported receiving $135 million in royalty payments. By 2021, that figure had ballooned to over $350 million, representing a 160% increase in just 2 years. This dramatic surge in revenue was primarily driven by royalties from Moderna, the pharmaceutical giant that had partnered with the NIH to develop one of the most successful COVID-19 vaccines. As millions of doses were administered worldwide, the royalty payments poured into the NIH. While the agency refused to disclose the exact amount it received from Moderna, experts estimated it to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Critics argued that the NIH, as a public institution, had a responsibility to be more transparent about its financial dealings, particularly when such significant sums of money were involved. Despite being a public institution funded by taxpayers, the NIH had a long history of being secretive about its financial dealings. Information about royalty payments was not readily available to the public, and requests for such information were often met with resistance. This lack of transparency was particularly concerning given the potential for conflicts of interest. When scientists at the NIH are financially invested in the success of a particular drug or vaccine, it raises questions about their objectivity. The NIH argued that its secrecy was necessary to protect intellectual property and to prevent competitors from gaining an unfair advantage. However, critics countered that the agency's lack of transparency went far beyond what was necessary to protect legitimate business interests. It was, they argued, a deliberate attempt to shield the agency from public scrutiny. This culture of opacity was deeply ingrained within the NIH. It was evident in the agency's reluctance to disclose information, its complex and often confusing regulations, and its general unwillingness to engage in open dialogue with the public. John Mascola, the director of the Vaccine Research Center, VRC, played a pivotal role in the development of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. He was also, it turned out, receiving substantial royalty payments from the very company whose vaccine he helped to develop. Mascola's dual roles, as a leading government scientist and a recipient of significant industry royalties, raised immediate red flags. Critics argued that his financial stake in Moderna's success could have compromised his objectivity and influenced his decision-making at the VRC. They pointed to the fact that Mascola had personally overseen the early stages of the Moderna vaccine's development and had advocated for its rapid clinical testing. The NIH, in defense of Mascola, argued that his royalty payments were in line with agency policy and that he had recused himself from any decisions directly related to Moderna. However, the agency's explanations did little to quell public concern. The fact that a senior scientist at the NIH tasked with overseeing vaccine development was personally profiting from the success of a particular vaccine was deeply troubling to many. Mascola's case highlighted the need for stricter ethical guidelines and greater transparency within the NIH. It also underscored the inherent conflicts of interest that can arise when government scientists are financially invested in the success of private companies. A relatively unknown company before the pandemic, Moderna saw its fortune skyrocket with the success of its mRNA vaccine. Critics argued that the NIH's financial stake in Moderna's success could have influenced the agency's decisions regarding the vaccine's development and approval. They pointed to the fact that the NIH had fast-tracked the Moderna vaccine's clinical trials and had granted the company billions of dollars in research funding. While the NIH maintained that all decisions were made solely on scientific merit, the agency's close financial ties to Moderna fueled skepticism and cast a shadow over the vaccine's success. While such collaborations are essential for driving innovation, they also create potential conflicts of interest that must be carefully managed. The NIH's handling of its relationship with Moderna, and its reluctance to be transparent about its financial dealings, raised serious questions about the agency's ability to effectively manage these conflicts and maintain public trust. As a publicly funded institution, the NIH must improve its transparency. Building public trust hinges on openness. Further investigation is imperative to ensure agencies like the NIH prioritize the public's interests. Congress must hold accountable those who fail to do so when necessary. In early March, Senator Rand Paul introduced the Royalty Transparency Act, which passed unanimously out of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. The measure is a much-needed reform. Thank you for watching till the end. Stand up for free speech and help protect the free exchange of ideas online. Please like and subscribe to help us reach more viewers.